Hit, start continuous prose. The history books want you to forget her name. They want you to believe that in the late 19th century the world was simple. God was in his heaven, the law was the law, and the dark, tangled forests of the Appalachian Mountains were just trees. They lied today. We're pulling a story from the shadows that the official records tried to bury, a story so disturbing, so impossible, that entire communities swore an oath of silence. This isn't just a ghost story. This is the case of Mary Whitlock. And before we dive in, do me a favor, tell me in the comments, what's the craziest local legend from your hometown? Because I guarantee you, it doesn't come close to this. Our story begins in 1893. The Appalachian Mountains are a different world. It's not a place of hiking trails and tourist cabins. It's a fortress of fog, deep valleys, and secrets that go back generations. This is a land where faith and fear are the same damn thing, where people knew the old ways and they knew what to avoid. Into this world steps Mary Whitlock. She was 36 years old, born near Asheville, North Carolina in 1857, and on the surface she was a saint by day. Mary wore the simple black habit of a nun. She walked the remote trails, visiting isolated settlements that doctors and preachers never bothered with. She offered prayers. She delivered herbal remedies. She brought spiritual comfort to the sick and the dying. The mountain folk, who trusted no one, opened their doors to her. They saw her as a blessing, but that was by day. As the sun bled out behind the sharp peaks and the fog rolled in like a shroud, the whispers would start. Rumors passed in taverns over cracked mugs of corn liquor. Stories whispered by the fireplace as the shadows grew long. They said, something else walked those mountains at night. What made Mary Whitlock so terrifying was the duality. The woman who held the hand of a dying child in the morning was different after sunset. Witnesses reported things that made no sense, chants that weren't Latin, lights in the woods where no house stood. They said she could talk to the woods. And worse, they said the woods talked back the Buncombe County archives. They're a mess. Records from that time are fragmentary, and when you look for Mary Whitlock, the gaps are deliberate, pages are torn out, reports are lost. What's left? It paints a picture of a woman living two lives. One life was a lie, the other was a nightmare. In 1893, Mary established what she called a spiritual retreat. It was deep in the mountains near the jagged border of North Carolina and Tennessee. This place was not easy to get to. You couldn't take a carriage. You had to follow winding game trails, cross icy streams, and navigate gorges that would break your neck if you slipped. She claimed this isolation was for contemplation, for faith, to be away from the distractions of the modern world. But the closest neighbors who lived miles away started to notice things. They saw lights. Strange, pulsing lights in the deep woods long after midnight when every soul should be asleep. They heard sounds, chants, echoing through the valleys. But it wasn't singing. It was a low, vibrational hum that made their teeth ache. And then the traveler started to go missing. It was slow at first, a tinker here, a fur trapper there, people who lived on the road, the mountains, and they ate people. It was a fact of life. So for a while, no one asked questions. They just blamed the mountains. They were blaming the wrong thing. The change came in 1894. A respected merchant from Knoxville, Tennessee, a man named Silas Croft, was passing through. He was a practical man, a skeptic. He'd heard the rumors about the crazy mountain nun, and he told the folks at the last trading post that he was going to expose her. Silas Croft was never seen again. His disappearance was different. He wasn't some lonely trapper. He had money, he had family, and his family raised hell. The case landed on the desk of Sheriff William Patterson. Patterson was not a man to be trifled with. He was a hard man, born of the mountains himself. He'd seen snake handlers, faith healers, and frauds. He figured Mary Whitlock was just another con artist preying on the superstitious. He gathered 3 of his best deputies, saddled up, and rode toward the Tennessee border on a cloudy, heavy October afternoon. He thought he was going to arrest a woman. He was wrong. What Patterson and his men found, it would break them. The sheriff kept a personal journal. It was found decades later, in 1962, tucked inside a false-bottomed trunk. His granddaughter finally released it. And his entry for that day, it's chilling. He wrote that the air itself was wrong. As they got closer to the retreat, the woods went silent. No birds, no insects, just the sound of their own breathing and the thump of their horses' hooves. He wrote, "The place exuded an atmosphere of oppression indescribable." The retreat was a simple wooden cabin, modest. A small, rough-hewn chapel was attached to the side. It looked normal. It was the inside that defied all logic. Patterson kicked the door open. The main room was a contradiction. Religious symbols were everywhere: crosses, rosaries, a painting of the Virgin Mary, but they were mingled with other things that made no sense. There were tables covered in strange, gleaming metal tools that looked surgical. There were alchemical charts tacked to the wall, showing phases of the moon and strange equations, and the books, stacks of them. Manuscripts in languages Patterson couldn't identify. He noted that the air near them felt hot. And then there was the basement. It was a trap door hidden under a bearskin rug. Patterson's deputies, they balked. They didn't want to go down. The smell. It wasn't death. It was ozone, like a lightning strike, and something else. Something sickly sweet. Patterson lit a lantern, drew his revolver, and went down alone. He was expecting a root cellar. What he found was a network. The basement wasn't a cellar, it was a cavern. Tunnels, carved from the rock, snaked out in every direction. They extended far beyond the footprint of the cabin above. It was a lair. Patterson followed one tunnel. The air grew colder. The humming sound he'd heard rumors about it was real. It was down here. It seemed to be coming from the rock itself. And that's when he saw the cages. They were large, iron, like you'd use for a bear. Most were empty, but one was not. He raised the lantern. He wasn't prepared. He wasn't ready. He didn't find Silas Croft. He found parts of him. No. Wait, that's not what the journal says. It was worse. He found Silas Croft's hat, his boots, his journal, all piled neatly in the corner of the cage. The journal was open. Patterson's hands were shaking so hard he almost dropped the lantern. He read the last entry. The handwriting was shaky, frantic. "She found me. The singing, it's beautiful. She says the mountain is hungry." Patterson ran. He scrambled out of that basement, slammed the trap door, and screamed for his deputies. Find her now!" But here's the twist. They didn't have to look. As Patterson and his men burst out of the cabin, guns drawn, they found Mary Whitlock. She wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was in the small attached chapel, kneeling in her nun's habit. She was praying. She turned her head as they entered. Her face was serene calm. She looked at the four terrified armed men, and she smiled. Patterson wrote in his journal. It was not a smile of welcome. It was a smile of knowing. They arrested her. They put her in chains. They didn't speak on the entire ride back to Sevier County. They just rode the deputies. They were broken. They'd seen the tunnels. They'd smelled the air. They locked Mary Whitlock in the county jail. Stone walls, iron bars. Patterson, he finally breathed. He thought it was over. He was so wrong. Mary Whitlock was in that cell for less than 72 hours, and the circumstances of her escape. This is the part of the story that defies all rational explanation. Some say she had helped that influential people she had healed, bribed the guards. Others, they believe she used less conventional methods. Patterson's official report is one sentence: the prisoner escaped custody. But his private journal tells a different story. He wrote that he went home that night, but he couldn't sleep. The humming sound, it was in his head. He dreamed of the tunnels. He dreamed of her smile. He woke up in a cold sweat at 3 a.m. He knew she was gone. He raced to the jail. The night guards, they were there, 2 of them. They were awake, but they were wrong. They were standing at the end of the hall, facing the wall, motionless. "Boys!" Patterson yelled. They didn't turn. Patterson ran to them. He grabbed one by the shoulder. The man slowly turned. His eyes were blank empty. And he was humming. He was humming the same damn song from the mountain. Patterson drew his gun. He ran to Mary's cell. The cell door was locked from the outside. The key was still on the hook. He looked through the bars. The cell was empty. Patterson's blood ran cold. He fumbled for the key, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. It was empty, except for one thing. Sitting in the center of the stone floor was a single polished black bead. From a rosary, Mary Whitlock had disappeared like smoke, and the hunt had just begun. The months that followed Mary's escape, they were chaos. Sheriff Patterson was a man obsessed. He organized searches. He led posses into those mountains that lasted for weeks. They explored forgotten trails. They rappelled into deep caves that cut into the bowels of the earth. Every single expedition came back empty-handed, and the men who went on those searches, they never came back the same. They returned with distant looks in their eyes, a hollow stare. They were reluctant to speak of what they'd seen, or heard. They'd sit in the tavern, but they wouldn't drink. They'd just stare. They'd seen things in those deep woods. They'd seen the symbols. But we'll get to that. In December of 1894, the Asheville Citizen newspaper, it broke the story, or part of it. The articles were cautious. They avoided the specific, terrifying details of the basement. They hinted at disturbing discoveries and practices incompatible with her religious claims. A young, ambitious journalist named Thomas Brennan. He smelled a story. Brennan traveled to the retreat by now. It was empty, abandoned. He wrote a series of reports that caused a storm across 2 states. He described the property as a place where normalcy seemed suspended, where natural laws seemed bent. But Brennan, he did something Patterson hadn't. He interviewed the locals, the dozens of people Mary had helped, and their testimonies. They formed an unsettling mosaic. He spoke to an elderly woman named Agnes Morrow. She lived 5 miles from the retreat. She swore Mary had visited her regularly. For years she'd bring herbs. She'd pray. Agnes wept for the journalist. She was kind, she insisted. She cared for me. Brennan pushed. "Did you ever notice anything strange?" Agnes paused. "Only her eyes," she whispered. "There was an intensity. Sometimes it made me uncomfortable, like she wasn't looking at me but through me, like I was being evaluated. Then there was Jacob Hensley. Hensley was a farmer, a tough, no-nonsense man. He claimed he'd encountered Mary at a crossroads one harsh winter night. He was returning from Johnson City. His wagon was stuck, and he saw her, standing in the middle of the road, motionless like a statue in the moonlight. I offered her a ride," Hensley stammered, sweating as he told the story. She just watched me silently, and then she wasn't there. She just disappeared." Brennan scoffed. "She walked into the woods, Jacob." "No!" Hensley shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "She disappeared into the dark, and when I passed the same spot the next morning after I got my wagon free, I found markings on the ground." "What kind of markings?" "Symbols," Hensley whispered, his eyes wide. "Traced in the frozen earth, complex geometric patterns." Brennan wrote it all down. And then the church got involved. The bishop of the Diocese of Asheville, he issued an official statement. It rocked the entire region. The statement said that Mary Whitlock had never been formally ordained as a nun. Her habit, her prayers, her title. It was all a fraud. She had simply adopted the vestment. She had no connection to the Catholic Church. None. This revelation, it shattered people. These communities, they had trusted her. They had confessed to her. They had shared their most intimate afflictions, believing she was a representative of God. If she wasn't, then who or what had they let into their homes? But the real question, the one that plagued Patterson and obsessed Brennan, was simple. What exactly was Mary Whitlock doing? The official records, they're maddeningly incomplete. Disturbing artifacts, obscure documents, evidence of incompatible practices. It's vague. It's deliberately vague. It's as if there was a conspiracy of silence, a tacit agreement among the few who knew the truth to never fully reveal it. They weren't protecting the community. They were protecting the world from the knowledge of what was possible. In February of 1895, the case, it came back. A family of German settlers, the Webbers. They'd just settled in western North Carolina. They reported seeing a woman matching Mary's description near their property. She appeared for 3 consecutive nights, always at the same time just after midnight. She was observing, watching the house from a distance, motionless. On the 4th night, the family patriarch, Friedrich Weber, a hard man who feared nothing, he'd had enough. He grabbed his rifle, he stormed out onto the porch, he shouted at her, "Who are you?" Mary just watched him. Weber fired a warning shot into the air and she vanished, not ran vanished, as if she had never been there, Weber's account. It gained credibility when other families in the area began reporting similar sightings. She wasn't gone. She hadn't fled. She was moving. She was circling, watching. Some speculated she was looking for a new retreat, a new lair. Others believed she was waiting for the authorities' attention to subside. But Patterson, he knew it was neither. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't waiting. She was hunting Sheriff Patterson. He knew she was still out there. The sightings proved it. He intensified the search, but the Appalachians, they're not just woods. They are thousands of square miles of dense forest, inaccessible mountains, unexplored caves, valleys where the sunlight barely penetrates a person. Determined to remain hidden, could do so indefinitely. And Mary Whitlock, she knew these mountains. She knew them like the back of her hand. They weren't a prison, they were a fortress. During the spring of 1895, the sightings, they became more frequent and more disturbing. A Methodist pastor, Elijah Crawford, he claimed he encountered Mary inside his own church in Boone, North Carolina. It was early Sunday morning. He'd arrived to prepare his sermon, and he saw her sitting in the back pew, her face covered by the hood of her habit. Crawford said he felt a chill run down his spine, a sense of an evil presence, a presence so profound it made him question his own faith. He said, "In the name of God, who are you?" She didn't move. Crawford blinked, and she was gone. He ran to the pew. There was nothing. Only the faint smell of ozone. These accounts, they created an atmosphere of pure terror. People locked their doors. They avoided nighttime travel. They became suspicious of all strangers. This wasn't a common criminal. This was something different, something that defied understanding. Local preachers, they seized on the story. They warned their flocks. This was the danger of false piety. This was how evil disguised itself under the guise of holiness. In June of that year, a group of hunters, they found something. Near the French Broad River, it revived the entire case. They found the remains of a burned-out structure hidden in a deep valley, accessible only by a barely visible trail. Among the rubble, they found objects that clearly belonged to Mary, including a rosary made of black beads, the same rosary witnesses had described. But the fire, it had been intense, so intense that little remained, just ash and charred fragments. The discovery of the charred remains it raised more questions than answers. Patterson examined the site personally. He determined the fire had happened at least 2 weeks before the hunters' discovery. The intensity of the flames, it suggested it wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, meticulous destruction. Someone had burned the structure purposefully, eliminating evidence, or perhaps performing some sort of final ritual. But they missed something. Among the rubble, investigators found partially preserved fragments of paper pages from books that had miraculously withstood the fire. One of these fragments, it fell into the hands of a Professor Theodore Ashworth, a scholar at the University of North Carolina. He specialized in ancient texts, obscure manuscripts. Ashworth spent weeks analyzing these charred fragments, trying to decipher the words that were still legible. What he discovered deeply disturbed him. The texts, they weren't just one language. They were a mixture, medieval Latin, Greek, and other languages that Ashworth couldn't fully identify. There were references to practices he had only encountered in very ancient documents, treatises that the church itself had tried to suppress for centuries. Ashworth wrote a confidential report to the authorities. He suggested that Mary Whitlock possessed extraordinary knowledge of esoteric traditions, forbidden knowledge. It was as if she had access to a secret library, a library that shouldn't exist. And then the sightings started again. July 1895, Gatlinburg, Tennessee. A blacksmith, Samuel Dockery. He swore he recognized her. At the market buying provisions, flour, salt, like an ordinary person. Dockery, he knew the stories. He ran to get the sheriff. When he tried to approach her to confirm her identity, she turned. She looked right at him, and she disappeared into the crowd with an agility that seemed impossible for someone wearing bulky religious robes. Mary Whitlock's case. It started to attract attention beyond the Appalachian borders, newspapers in Richmond, Louisville. Sensationalist writers, they began to create even more elaborate narratives. They mixed fact with fiction. They transformed Mary into a near mythical figure, a boogeyman for the mountains. This made the authorities' work even more difficult. It became impossible to distinguish between genuine accounts and fabricated stories. But then in September, something happened, something that proved the worst fears were real. A 24-year-old woman, Helena Pritchard. She was found disoriented near Blowing Rock, North Carolina. Wandering the roads, unable to explain her whereabouts. For the past 5 days, she was malnourished, dehydrated, and in a state of profound shock. She couldn't form coherent sentences. When she finally regained her ability to speak, Helena told a story that left everyone again stunned. She claimed she had been approached by a nun. Her horse had gone lame. During a journey, the nun, Mary, offered to help. She invited Helena to rest in a nearby hut, promising to care for the animal and provide food. Helena, trusting the woman's religious appearance, accepted. What happened next remained hazy in her memory, as if she had lived entire days in a disturbing dream state. She recalled chants in strange languages, lights that pulsed in hypnotic rhythms, sensations of floating and sinking simultaneously. She remembered Mary's hands drawing on her skin with something old, cold. When Helena finally escaped or was freed, she couldn't explain how her last clear memory was of being in the cabin. The next was waking up on the side of the road miles away, with no idea how she'd traveled that distance. The doctor who examined her found strange marks on her wrists and ankles, as if she'd been restrained, but Helena had no memory of resistance. The marks, they weren't rope burns, they were scars, delicate, intricate patterns, symbols, burned into her flesh. Helena Pritchard's testimony, it changed everything. This wasn't just a religious impostor. This wasn't just forbidden knowledge. This was evidence. Evidence that Mary was actively seeking victims, luring vulnerable people. Sheriff Patterson, he issued alerts throughout the region, warning traveling women do not trust strangers. Regardless of their appearance, we can only imagine the terror, the fear that instilled in the isolated Appalachian communities. People already lived in fear of bears, panthers, sudden storms. Now there was a new fear, more insidious, the possibility that evil itself was walking among them disguised in the most unsuspecting form. And Helena wasn't the last victim. October 1895. A middle-aged man, Robert Caldwell, a Knoxville merchant. He disappeared for 8 days. He was found near Hot Springs, North Carolina. Like Helena, he was disoriented, unable to clearly explain what had happened. He remembered accepting hospitality from a lonely nun. He remembered drinking something she offered and then nothing, only confused fragments, images of spinning lights, sensations of floating, and hands touching him. The pattern was becoming horrifyingly clear. Mary Whitlock hadn't left. She was operating in the shadows, constantly moving, establishing temporary safe havens, and luring unsuspecting people. But what was her ultimate goal? Why did she hold these people for days before releasing them? And the most terrifying question of all, how many other victims were there? The ones who were never found, the ones who vanished completely without a trace. The authorities in multiple counties, they finally started coordinating, sharing information, organizing joint searches. A telegraph network was established, relaying warnings posters. Describing Mary were distributed taverns, post offices, churches, a $500 reward, a massive sum at the time. But Mary always seemed one step ahead every time. The authorities got close. She had already moved. It was as if she had a network of informants, or perhaps she simply knew the mountains so intimately that she could sense danger approaching before it materialized. The Appalachians were her territory, a natural labyrinth that she had transformed into a personal fortress. The winter of 1895, it arrived with unusual severity. Blizzards blocked roads, isolated entire communities. The search for Mary Whitlock was temporarily suspended. It was impossible. It was as if nature itself had conspired to protect her, creating an impenetrable barrier. And during these cold, silent months, something unexpected happened. The reports of sightings ceased completely. Not a single mention. Some began to speculate she had perished, that the brutal winter had done the work the authorities could not. Others believed she had fled, gone west. But Patterson, he believed in a third, more disturbing possibility. Perhaps Mary had found a perfect hiding place, somewhere deep, deep in the mountains where she could spend the winter in complete isolation, patiently waiting. The Appalachians are rife with ancient caves, some so vast they could house small communities. Patterson knew she wasn't dead, she was evolving. When spring finally arrived in 1896 and the snow thawed, the first travelers to traverse the mountain trails began reporting unsettling discoveries in multiple locations, spread over hundreds of kilometers, symbols carved into trees, etched into rocks. These weren't random markings. They were deliberate, intentional forming patterns, patterns that some recognized similar to those found in Mary's original retreat, similar to the marks burned into Helena Pritchard's skin. It was as if she had spent the winter marking her territory, leaving signs of her presence. A Presbyterian minister, Nathaniel Green. He traveled the isolated communities. He became particularly interested in these symbols. He wasn't just a preacher, he was a scholar, a cartographer. He began documenting each mark, sketching them in a notebook, noting their exact locations. And Green, he realized something that chilled his blood. The symbols weren't randomly distributed. When he mapped their locations, they formed a kind of network. a web connecting specific points across the mountains. Green shared his findings with Sheriff Patterson. He suggested, "Sheriff, this isn't a map to places. I think this is a map of something else." Patterson organized expeditions to investigate the points Green had identified, the central nodes of this mysterious network. What they found at these locations ranged from nothing at all to small caches, provisions, tools, evidence that Mary had established multiple temporary refuges. But one site discovered in May 1896 near Grandfather Mountain, it revealed something truly disturbing. It was a natural cave high on a cliff. It had been modified. Rudimentary structures built inside signs that someone had lived there for weeks, perhaps months. But what caught their most attention were the paintings on the cave walls, complex images created with natural pigments, depicting scenes difficult to interpret, human figures in various poses, some appearing to be in ecstasy, others in agony, representations of the sun and moon, in specific positions suggesting some sort of calendar, and at the center of it all, a female figure in what appeared to be a religious habit, but surrounded by symbols that definitely didn't belong to any Christian tradition. It was as if Mary was leaving a record of her beliefs, or perhaps a map of her intentions. Professor Ashworth was summoned. Again, he spent 3 days inside that cave, studying every detail. His subsequent report was even more disturbing than the last. Ashworth identified elements: European pagan traditions, practices suppressed by the church during the Middle Ages mixed with what appeared to be Native American knowledge. It was an extraordinary synthesis, a blending of belief systems that shouldn't exist together. Ashworth told Patterson in confidence, "Sheriff, this isn't just worship. This is science. I don't understand it, but this is a machine. The map, the paintings, it's all part of a machine." Meanwhile, the sightings resumed June 1896. A family traveling through the Linville Gorge region, they reported seeing a woman dressed as a nun watching them from a distant cliff. She remained motionless for several minutes before disappearing into the trees. Other reports began to arrive. Always the same pattern: Mary would appear briefly, allowing people to glimpse her but never getting close enough to be captured. There was something deliberate about it, as if she wanted people to know she was still around, that she hadn't fled or perished. Some interpreted this as arrogance, a direct challenge to the authorities. Others saw it as a warning, a way to keep fear alive. But Patterson and Green and Ashworth, they suspected something more complex. She wasn't challenging them, she was testing something. August 1896. An incident occurred that nearly resulted in Mary's capture. A group of miners working near Spruce Pine, North Carolina. One of them, Patrick O'Brien, he spotted smoke rising from a nearby ravine. Suspecting it might be Mary's camp, O'Brien and 3 companions decided to investigate. They were tough men, armed. Not afraid, they approached, silently moving through the trees until they reached a position from which they could observe. It was her Mary Whitlock. She was sitting near a small fire, writing in a journal, looking completely relaxed, as if she didn't have a care in the world. The miners watched for a few minutes, planning how they could surround her. They wanted the $500 reward. They spread out, ready to rush her. And then something extraordinary happened. Mary stopped writing. Without looking up, she spoke. Her voice, clear, calm, echoing slightly in the ravine. "Patrick O'Brien," she said. O'Brien froze. She lifted her head and looked directly at where he was hiding. Despite being a considerable distance away, camouflaged by dense vegetation, she smiled, a smile that O'Brien later described as simultaneously serene and deeply disturbing. "Tell your wife," Mary said softly, "the fever in her lungs is gone." O'Brien's blood turned to ice. His wife was sick, dying before the miners could react. Mary stood up. She closed her journal and began to climb the ravine wall, not run, climb with a speed and agility that O'Brien swore was impossible, like a spider. The men pursued her shouting, firing their guns, but she moved through the rocks and dense vegetation as if she knew every stone, every root. Within minutes, she had completely disappeared, leaving her pursuers confused and exhausted. O'Brien, he ran all the way home. He burst into his cabin. His wife, who hadn't left her bed in a week, was sitting at the table eating. The fever was gone. The episode with the miners, it reinforced a growing perception. Mary Whitlock wasn't just clever or lucky. She possessed abilities. Abilities that defied explanation. Her ability to sense approach, to move through impossible terrain, to know things she shouldn't know, to heal from a distance, it created an almost supernatural aura around her. This made the authorities' task even more difficult. Many men simply refused to participate in the search. They were terrified, terrified of facing something they didn't understand. The fall of 1896. It brought a significant shift. Sheriff Patterson, he recognized conventional methods weren't working. He wasn't hunting a person, he was hunting something else. He decided to take a different approach. He stopped organizing posses. He went to Pastor Green and Professor Ashworth. The three of them locked themselves in Patterson's office. They spread out Green's map of the symbols. They studied Ashworth's reports on the texts and the paintings. They studied the accounts of the victims. Patterson was methodical. He pored over detailed maps of the area, marking each relevant point, citing symbols, caves, and gradually a pattern began to emerge. The places where Mary had been seen, they weren't random. She moved in a predictable cycle, returning to certain areas at regular intervals. Patterson noticed something else. These movements seemed to coincide with moon phases and seasonal changes. Ashworth, he confirmed. The symbols, the cave paintings, sir, he whispered, his face pale. They're astronomical. This network Green mapped. It's a calendar, an engine powered by the mountain in the sky. Yeah. She wasn't following a human calendar. She was following a calendar of her own, determined by natural forces. Armed with this understanding, Patterson was able to predict. He could predict where Mary would likely appear next. Late October 1896, Roan Mountain. On the border, Patterson didn't send a posse. He discreetly positioned observers, not deputies, Pastor Green, Professor Ashworth, and three experienced mountain men he trusted with his life, hunters who knew how to remain invisible. For days they kept silent vigil, watching, waiting. On the night of October 28th, the new moon. When the darkness was absolute, one of the observers reported activity. He had seen a light, not a torch, not a fire, a faint blue pulsing light, moving through the trees, following an ancient trail that few knew about. Patterson was notified. He assembled his team, 6 of his best men, plus Green and Ashworth. He gave specific instructions. Do not attempt to capture her. Do not engage. We follow, we watch. We discover her location. It was risky. She might detect them, but Patterson believed that understanding her base of operations was more valuable than another failed arrest. For 3 consecutive nights, Patterson's team followed Mary's movements, maintaining a safe distance. She appeared to be undertaking some sort of pilgrimage, visiting specific locations. The locations Green had mapped. At each location she stopped. She performed actions they couldn't fully comprehend, arranging stones, tracing symbols in the air, long periods of silent stillness. Green swore he saw the symbols on the rocks glow faintly when she touched them. On the 4th night, Mary finally returned to what appeared to be her primary hiding place. It was a complex rock formation, high on Roan Mountain, a place difficult to access. A narrow entrance between 2 large boulders. The scouts carefully marked the location and returned to report to Patterson. He had her. He knew where she slept. Patterson made a decision. He wouldn't storm the place. He would wait. He would wait until there was clear evidence that Mary had left. He didn't want another direct confrontation. He wanted to see what she was hiding. For 2 weeks they maintained constant surveillance, taking shifts. Freezing in the November cold. It was a period of extreme tension. In mid-November, the opportunity finally arrived. Mary was seen descending the mountain carrying a bag, clearly prepared for a longer journey. The observers watched her until she disappeared into the valley below. Patterson waited 6 more hours. Then he gave the signal. Patterson, Green, Ashworth, and 6 deputies. They climbed up to the rock formation, guns drawn, lanterns lit, hearts pounding. They slipped through the narrow entrance, and what they found inside that refuge, it provided the final shocking answer. It explained everything. And it was more terrifying than any of them could have ever imagined. They stepped inside. It wasn't a cave. It was a cathedral. The walls weren't rock. They were lined with bookshelves carved directly into the stone. Thousands of books, manuscripts, scrolls. The air wasn't damp or cold. It was warm, dry, and it hummed. That same low vibration, it was coming from everywhere. Ashworth gasped. He ran to one of the shelves. "This is impossible," he whispered. "This is from the Library of Alexandria. It was supposed to have been burned." Green pointed his lantern up. The ceiling was covered in the moving symbols, not painted, carved, and they were glowing, pulsing faintly with a soft blue light. In the center of the room wasn't a bed. It wasn't cages. It was a massive flat stone table, an altar. And on the altar was one single object, a large leather-bound book, Mary Whitlock's journal. Patterson walked towards it, his hand shaking. His deputies fanned out, looking for her, but the place was empty. Patterson opened the journal. The handwriting wasn't frantic or mad. It was precise, elegant, scientific. It wasn't a diary, it was a lab notebook, and it was in English. Patterson began to read, and the truth unraveled, twist after twist. Mary Whitlock wasn't from Asheville. She wasn't American. She was born in Prague. She wasn't a nun or a witch. She was a physicist, an astronomer, a doctor, one of the most brilliant minds in Europe. She had fled persecution, fled a world that wasn't ready for a woman like her. Her research hadn't been into forbidden magic. It was into acoustic resonance, geomagnetic energy, quantum states. She had discovered something that the Appalachian Mountains, because of their unique quartz composition, acted as a giant natural amplifier, a speaker that could broadcast energy. The chants weren't prayers, they were frequencies. The symbols weren't evil, they were equations. Patterson flipped through the pages, his mind reeling. He found the names Agnes Morrow, Jacob Hensley. They weren't test subjects, they were patients. Agnes had cancer. Mary had used resonance to destroy it. Jacob Hensley had seen her disappear because she had briefly phased out of sync with visible light. Helena Pritchard, Robert Caldwell. They weren't abducted. They were volunteers. The lost time, anesthesia, the marks on their skin, not burns, tattoos of conductive ink to focus the energy. She was healing them. Curing diseases doctors couldn't even name. The jail escape. She didn't escape. She had healed the 2 guards. One had crippling arthritis. The other was going blind. Then she simply unlocked the door from the inside. The lock was simple, and walked out. Patrick O'Brien's wife, healed from miles away. She wasn't a monster. She was a miracle. Patterson slammed the book shut. He was shaking. Not from fear, from awe. "Sheriff?" one of his deputies called out. Patterson looked up. His 6 men were standing in a circle, staring at the glowing symbols on the wall, and they were humming, all of them. The same low vibrational tone. Green was touching one of the books, weeping. Ashworth was muttering to himself, "It's all true." Patterson made a decision that would seal this story in darkness. He tucked the journal inside his coat. He drew his revolver. He fired one shot into the ceiling. The sound snapped his men out of their trance. "We found it," Patterson roared, his voice echoing. "This is a den of evil." "She wasn't here." "Burn it." "Sheriff, no!" Ashworth screamed. "This is knowledge beyond more. Burn it all," Patterson commanded. He knew what Ashworth didn't. He knew what Green didn't. The world wasn't ready. These men weren't ready. They would fight over this power. They would weaponize it. It was too much. Too soon. Reluctantly, his men obeyed. They piled the ancient books, the scrolls, they lit torches, they burned that library, they burned that cathedral of knowledge until nothing was left but ash and smoke. Patterson's official report was filed a week later. It was very simple. Mary Whitlock's lair had been found. A fire had destroyed it. She was presumed dead. Case closed. The history books remember her as a footnote, a crazy, fraudulent nun, but that's not the end of the story. Patterson went home. He hid the journal, and he read it. He read the last page, the entry from mid-November, the day she left the cave. "The experiment is complete," Mary had written. "The resonance is stable. The harmonics are aligned. I have healed all I can reach, but fear distorts the field. The sheriff he approaches, he does not understand, not yet. It is time the veil is thin. I am not fleeing, I am ascending. I leave this book for the one who can understand." Patterson closed the book. He lived another 30 years. He never spoke of Mary Whitlock again, but, they say, in his old age, his crippling arthritis disappeared. They say his eyesight became sharp as a hawk's. The final scene is this: 1927, William Patterson, an old man. He's at his desk. He pulls out a hidden drawer. He removes the journal. He opens it. He picks up a pen, and in perfect identical handwriting, he adds a new entry. "Mary," it says, "I understand now. I'm coming. The mountains still hold secrets." And if you enjoyed this story that the history books tried to bury, do me a favor, smash that like button, and don't forget to subscribe, because the truth is way stranger than fiction. And let me know in the comments, do you think Sheriff Patterson found her?